Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. Yeah, I just had a quick thought in my mind. We were planning loosely what we were going to talk about today because a lot of it's a moving target. And then I realized by the time we decide what we're going to talk about, it could radically change. Like things are just moving and evolving. And we're going to focus initially on some big announcements in the housing industry. And that's in her wheelhouse, as she is very proficient in her life's work in the construction and real estate litigation area. She's a partner at Greenspoon, Marder, LLP in New York City. What's law got to do with it? Carol Sigmond joins us once again. She's our professional of the year. How you doing today?
I'm well today, Steve. How about you?
My head is spinning.
May you live in interesting times.
In one regard, a piece, I don't do politics, but a piece of me finds it exciting. I never know what I'm going to see when I click the news button. I never know. And sometimes I'm surprised. Now I'm getting, and I wonder if this is most people, getting a little immune to it. It's like, oh, wow, look at that. But it's not rocking my world like it was, but it's in a weird way. It's kind of exciting when there's new things happening. Unfortunately, a lot of these things do affect us and the bottom line, and that's a little unnerving, but it is what it is. So we got big announcements here in the housing industry. What's going on?
Well, there have been sort of two announcements in the last one today and one, earlier this week. Mm-hmm. Let's start with earlier this week because we can just kind of set it aside quickly. There are significant layoffs being planned for housing and urban development. Those layoffs appear to be attacking or in the area of affordable housing and subsidizing and supporting affordable housing. So affordable housing programs for young people may be not doing well under the current Secretary of HUD, Turner. That's one thing. Number two, his department is talking about withdrawing maintenance support from about 1 million older housing units all over the country. Now that's significant because that housing is by and large occupied by older people, many people on Social Security, families just starting out, and people who are not, economically well off. So that maintenance support may be critical. So we need to be monitoring that carefully.
Can you explain that a little bit more when we say maintenance support for these low-income housing areas? Well,
anybody who lives in a home or an apartment or anything knows you have to have maintenance. You've got to keep the sink. You don't want the faucet leaking. You want the toilet running over. You need the paint repaired. You need holes patched. Roofs need to be watertight. Walls need to be watertight. Windows stripping, that all needs to be in place to keep the weather out so the heat stays in or the air conditioning stays in. So it's basic everyday maintenance. And there was a time, really for about 30 years, when a lot of housing was allowed to deteriorate without a lot of good maintenance. And it probably wasn't the best set of decisions that were ever made, but we're now confronting that. And there are about 1 million units, as I understand it, all over the country. This is not just in big cities or on the coast, it's everywhere. And these units are from the 50s and the 60s and even some pre-war units. And they need maintenance. They need faucets, they need water pipes, they need drain pipes, they need roofs. Things of that nature. Many of them are multiple dwelling units, so they're apartment buildings in effect. And HUD is indicating that there may be some withdrawal of funding support for this activity because it is usually shared between state and local governments and the federal government. And it concerns me because we want to make sure the safety net stays in place. I think we are all concerned with the safety net.
What a potential catastrophe if these buildings aren't maintained, if the funding is pulled from it. Who's going to pay for it? It's not like there's landlord's going to take care of it.
Well, and it's worse than that too, because in some instances, and so much of this falls on local governments, and it's important to understand this, but if the funding isn't there to maintain the housing, the city may be forced to move people out. And then
Mm,
where do they move them to? There may not be other housing.
wow.
We can't have people in substandard housing where there's not heat or hot water, or, it's not safe or clean. The electricity isn't maintained. In a way, I think it's a little counterproductive. I think the cost to maintain these homes is probably worth it because it ensures safe, affordable housing for roughly 1 million families, which we need to think about.
What's the alternative? Okay, we know that cutbacks are there. It's happening. What can be done?
Well, so that morphs us very nicely into what J.D. Vance said today. So he's talking about a different approach to housing. And you almost get the feeling that there's a decision being made. Okay, we're not going to support all of this older housing. Let's tear it all down and rebuild it. And that's an interesting idea, certainly one that some of us have had before.
Mm-hmm.
Not a new idea in cities that have torn down failing housing projects and replaced them. The difficulty is with the tariffs on, how do you afford to build the new housing? With the cutbacks in the affordable housing subsidy program, how do you get the lending for that new housing? The Trump administration has got two sort of approaches to this. One is the view that the housing crisis is caused by undocumented workers, and that if the undocumented leave, then there'll be more housing available. I'm not sure anybody has a good handle on that. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's false. I just don't think anybody really knows. Certainly in New York, we used a lot of shelters that would not be considered housing. We were using dormitories for folks who don't house families in dormitories. So not sure how true that is, but it's an issue. Second of all, they're talking about, okay, let's slash certain regulations. Let's make it easier to build new housing. Now, one area they're talking about changing is in the zoning area. Now, you are not going to get an argument from me that zoning is part of the problem in the housing crisis. So I will make that argument for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so there, I totally agree. They're talking about, let's have higher density at transit hubs. Let's have higher density on, main streets. Let's have higher density near public transportation. That all makes perfect sense. They're also talking about EPA regulations. Now, I'm not exactly sure what he's talking about because I haven't seen any draft regs. I am a bit concerned about one thing. And you're probably semi-familiar with this. We've got Willets Point. Okay, so that's an old Brownsville site. And they're cleaning it up and they're going to put housing in there. Well, right now they're cleaning it up under existing regulations, so it's got to really get cleaned, and that means a lot of the soil has to actually be taken out and replaced. But that means that the housing will be clean. There won't be anything in the soil that's dangerous for the people who are living there. If we modify these areas, if we modify these kinds of issues, then we don't have necessarily clean soil or clean environment, and there may be gases and there may be other health dangers. So it would depend on the specific regulations that they propose in the environmental area to really judge. But
there's a lot to consider there, and there are even many that believe that when it rains, it's kicking up everything down there, as a starting point. I do believe we have a call. Hi, can you hear us?
Hi, yes, it's Mark from Penn State. I was just wondering, listening to you guys, very uplifting to know that your show is here. A friend of mine told me about it. It's amazing. And I was listening to Carol. What advice do you have that me and those students could do to stop Trump, what he's doing?
Mm. Here, I'm holding the ball. Now I'm throwing it to Carol.
Okay, so elections have consequences, and the country elected Donald Trump, and he is the president of the United States, and we have to respect the man in the office. My own view is that it's extremely important for the president of the United States and every other American to comply with federal law.
Right.
And I think we should be looking at process. Is the Trump administration following proper process? And let's take this issue that J.D. Vance raised about environmental. If we want to change the regulations, we have to go through what's called rulemaking. It's not an executive order by the president. It's not something that he can do by himself. You have to go through rulemaking, which means you have to publish it. It has to be open to comment. There are certain standards that, and one would hope that that process goes forward. I mean, it's a process that's been going on for 70 years on both sides of the aisle. Everyone is familiar with it. So process matters, and compliance with the law matters, and being lawful matters. For example, not to morph too far off of housing, but let's just take the young man who was arrested at Columbia for his protest or his involvement in the protests.
Mm-hmm.
It's not okay to arrest someone for their speech, including a green card holder. That's just not okay. As long as he's not advocating violence, yelling fire in a crowded theater, he's allowed to speak.
Right.
We need to hold all of our elected officials, not just the president, not just Republicans. Everyone needs to comply with the law. And if you were to challenge me, I could find lots of examples of Democrats that don't do it either. So this is a not a political issue. This is a comply with the law issue.
Right, fundamental.
Right.
So my advice to everyone in the country is, let's all adhere to, and let's expect our elected officials to adhere to the rule of law.
Gotcha. I don't know if that's the answer that you wanted, but we appreciate you calling.
No,
Yes,
I
thank
appreciate
you for the
listening
call.
to you guys. Carol, you're very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. What is the law regarding assembly? I remember there's some legal language.
Is, first of all, the Constitution says we have a right of assembly.
Okay.
It said that government may make reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions. For example, you want to hold a rally. Might not be a good idea to hold it in the middle of a, 8-lane superhighway with cars going 100 miles an hour. So a reasonable time, place, and manner might say not on the right of way of a major highway. You have to be in an area that's safe. So in New York, for example, you can protest practically anywhere in the city. There are very few places you can't protest. You may have to stay on the sidewalk. You may have to leave an open path for other people who are not involved in your protest to pass by. You may have to, if you're having a moving rally and you're walking down the street, you may have to stop periodically to let the crosstown traffic go by. Those have all been found by the courts to be reasonable time, place, and manner. And what's very important is they're content neutral. So if you're protesting for the president, you're protesting against the president, you're protesting for the mayor, you're protesting against the mayor, no matter what your position is, the rules are content neutral. They don't care what the speech is. They just want to regulate how it's done.
What about? So here I'm gonna throw things at you.
Go ahead.
What about if in eyes the language is questionable used during the protest? It's in a reasonable place, manner, situation, safe, call it that, flow of traffic, all of those things. All the boxes were checked, but there's signs up. People are holding signs, and there's some to some, again, it can be subjectionable, I guess, some language.
It normally that does not justify any action.
Mm-hmm.
The police often will monitor these to make sure that someone isn't getting rowdy. They may go and try to take someone out who is stirring up trouble or throwing things or things like that. So they may make an individualized arrest.
Sure.
They won't necessarily disrupt the entire protest. I have a particular sort of apolitical example to toss at you. So in Washington, D.C., there are many protests at many locations, and lots of people like to protest near the subways because there's lots of people coming and going.
Sure.
Some of those subways in Washington are very deep, and some of those escalators are a couple hundred feet. So if you were to fall down an escalator, you might not survive. So Washington, D.C.'s transit authority made some rules that say you have to stay, essentially, if you want to protest at a subway station, you have to stay out of a semicircle 15 feet in any direction from an escalator. Can't get any closer. You have to let people be able to get on and off the escalator safely, and you can't crowd them. Now that strikes you as sort of a common sense rule because there's public safety involved.
Seems reasonable so far.
Yeah. So there was an incident where a group decided that rule didn't really apply to them and they could trains. So we put a couple of guys undercover out there. We put some uniforms out there. We took a lot of pictures. And when they came to renew their permit, guess what? The answer was no, we're not renewing because you didn't follow the rules.
And those rules, just double checking here, well documented?
Yep. They were in the permit. I mean, they signed the permit application. They said, we understand we have to stay 15 feet away from the escalators for public safety reasons.
Ouch. Okay.
So, but the police are fairly sophisticated in seeing whether or not just because there's an objectionable sign, everything's okay.
Yeah.
And the tendency would be, as long as there was nothing physical happening, that it's okay. Now, there was an incident in New York where some pro-Palestinian protesters were blocking a gate, either on or off a college campus. I don't remember the details. And then at some point, they slammed the gate on the hand of a Jewish student who was passing. There were arrests that followed that because that's not a nice thing to do. That's a violent act. But the rest of the people who were just standing there sort of being obnoxious, this is America. You get to protest, but you don't get to slam the gate on somebody's hand.
So I want to pivot over to, and not spend a lot of time on this, but I want your feedback. And we do have an email I want to get to. January 6th, a few years ago, not doing politics here, just looking at the assembly of a bunch of people at the Capitol, short of some things that might have included violent acts. Okay. If we factored those out, was that assembly of people okay in your mind?
Well, there were a couple of problems with it. The first was it was on the Capitol grounds. And so there are some rules there because you have congressmen and security issues and things of that nature. But if you're talking about the rally that took place before, there may have been more guns there than were permissible under DC law. But that in and of itself, to me, was just speech.
And I'm talking about adhering to the law. Firearms. Now we're in a different. We just crossed over one bridge.
Yeah, I just. Yeah. But I think the speech. It's the talking, even to a big crowd, as long as to incite them to riot, is okay.
Gotcha.
There are some people who raise questions about some remarks made by some of the people, but
Gotcha. So let's go to Andrew. Ocean City, Maryland says, and by the way, we're changing topic totally. Totally different direction. He says, I'm considering a career in law and looking at real estate law. What would you suggest I look at when it comes to education?
So do we know if Andrew's in college or?
Doesn't say.
No. Well, first of all, the most important thing in college is to learn how to learn. It's less about what you study than learning how to study, at least my humble opinion. However, in today's day and age, I would be looking at engineering type curriculums and economic type curriculums, things that deal with, numbers and how things are fitting together in the economy. Those are things I would look at. I would also look at how things fit together physically, because that matters. Technology is always a good course of study, no matter what you're thinking about. If you're further along and you're thinking about going, for example, to law school, your basic first year curriculum is set. So your choices start in your second year. The fact of the matter is that construction is nothing but a narrow band of property law, and with elements of the UCC commercial law and commercial transactions and financing. So what you would want to do is look at property law and the items that bleed off of it, like commercial transactions, banking, finance, bankruptcy, all of those things that feed into that area. If you're looking at summer jobs and you're interested in real estate, maybe you try to get a job with a property manager. Maybe you try to get a job in an apartment building. Even if you're just a janitor, you're going to find out how they work, and you'll learn a lot about how property gets managed, and how it gets taken care of, and how complicated that can be. There's always the old, standard of trying to work construction. Depends on how many jobs there are. But there are other jobs too. For example, more and more construction is becoming remote and techie. So there's drone operations, and there's, scheduling, and there's how we get the logistics, we get the materials to the site on time, and how we do our logistics planning. So there's lots of opportunities to learn different aspects. Doesn't matter what you learn. It's that you learn.
Well, even the property management side of things, would have never thought of that, but that gives you such a view of what's going on, even if it's a part-time job, just to be immersed in that world. We're just about out of time. The one thing I truly love when we get together is you have a thirst for information. Are you like an information junkie?
Yes.
Yeah. You're always plugged into everything going on. It's almost like sometimes I try to test you. Hey, I heard this. Did you hear it? Yeah, I already heard that. Like, all right. It's refreshing. You're plugged into what's going on. And a lot of this, that we're looking at here has impact pretty much on all of us.
Yes.
If somebody wants to connect with you, even somebody like Andrew looking for advice for education or what, is there a way to reach you?
Absolutely. My email address is the best way I know. It's Carol, CAROL .Sigmond, SIGMOND @gmlaw.com. And feel free to email.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for today. Next time we get together, you never know what we're going to encounter.
It's always an adventure, Steve, and that's what life is, an adventure.
An adventure, and that's what makes it fun. Thanks for today.
Yep.
We'll catch up soon.
Bye.
We'll be right back. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Adopt US Kids presents Multiple Choice Parenting.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes?
How could he do this to you? And for Sheila, she has split ends.
B, console her?
Oh, sweetie, this is going to happen a lot. 4, maybe 5 more times before you get married.
C, take charge?
Got to get this all straightened out. Give a little talking to, man to man, mano a mano. Hey, Steve! Is now a good time? No? Okay, no problem. Bye.
Or D, help her find a new boyfriend?
I know a great place to meet boys. The internet. Nice, single boys. Never mind. How about some ice cream?
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
For more information on how you can adopt, visit adoptuskids.org. A public service announcement from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.